All right, everybody, welcome back to the Pelvic Pulse podcast. I've got Dr. Cassie in the house. And Cassie, we met online virtually through um, a little
Panel
panel
discussion. Yeah.
that was so, I think, impactful, maybe for the people there, but I think mostly for me and us.
Yeah, I think it was for the facilitators actually. Yeah, the panelists.
Because then we got to have a really great conversation on your new podcast, and I'm so happy to have you on mine. Um, I just want to ask today, just what is feeling really alive for you in the moment with your work, with your life, just to kind of kick us off.
Yeah. Something that's really invigorating me personally and professionally is doing this work of body trust and a reclamation of my body and its wanting and its wisdom and all of the desires and appetites that it holds, and living into giving myself permission for that in a way um, that wasn't accessible to me until this point in my journey, personally and professionally. So I'm really ramped to talk about it with anyone who will listen, because I think there's just so much here, especially for folks who just don't feel trusting of their body and have had that ruptured. And so I'm eager to share that news. And all of that is the pursuit of body liberation work, which is a big part of what lights me up right now, too.
Heck yes. Heck yes. I feel like we're both doing that through different avenues, different
Mhm.
lenses, and it's so I feel like enriching to hear about your work and how you're doing that. I remember that actually really lit me up when you
Mm.
connected those two ideas of like desire and appetite being
Mhm.
highly related. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, in general, we all as humans have inherent pleasure and joy and appetites of all kinds. And I mean, we could include sex in that, we could include food in that, other things that compel us and call to us, like initiate a longing. And um, what commonly happens is with the cultural narratives that exist that we're indoctrinated into. So whether that's diet culture or purity culture or um, just patriarchy in general, it ruptures that for so many folks where it feels like I shouldn't trust my appetites, I shouldn't trust my longing. And spurring from that is this real rupture in being able to connect and trust in your body, right? Like feeling like those desires and appetites are suspect or dangerous, maybe gross, perhaps.
Wow.
Um, and so there's um, there's a real reckoning that I think is helpful to do at different points on your journey of like, what does it mean to reclaim my appetites? And that includes reclaiming what my body is longing for and giving yourself real space to lean into those. And it's a real radical shift from, I think, what our culture offers, specifically, people who are female assigned at birth. And um, there's a lot of forces that are invested in you being separate from your body, separate from your desires, because I mean, if women are connected with their desires and their wanting, we're less easy to control, right? Because we're following our own intuition and honoring those needs.
I feel like I see that a lot within the birth sphere.
Mm,
But I'm so curious how you yourself, maybe if you had that rupture. I know I have, you know,
yeah,
maybe
totally.
want to share a little bit about your journey. I think that's so fascinating, like how you even got to this point of being available for this bodily and I feel like just overall identity liberation and
Mhm.
yeah, just full embodiment.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of the work that I do now is inseparable from my own body story. Um,
Heard.
so yeah, right. Um, and it's a story that's ongoing. So I'll just preface all of this with saying, like, I'm still in process. Like, I'm not talking from a place of like, I've arrived and like, I fully trust my body all the time and I fully give myself permission for pleasure all the time. I think I have grown a lot and I'm doing more of that. And I still live in the same culture that all of us do. And so negotiating that looks different day to day. But so part of my story is I grew up in a rural, conservative Christian community where most people stuck together. As far as I didn't know a lot of other people outside of that. And in that culture, there was a lot of sex negative messaging, and women were really second citizens, right? Like second class citizens, not a lot of power or autonomy. And everything was really oriented on the man and like your future husband and like taking care of his ego or his orgasm or his appetites, right? Like it was really decentered. It wasn't on me, it was out there. And there was so much sexual shame that also came from like the purity culture of the time when I grew up in the 90s. And that really ruptured like an ability to be able to trust. So like as I entered adolescence and started to have this awakening of sexuality and desire, there was this sense of like I should shut that down. I shouldn't feel that. That's scary. That's dangerous. That's gonna, get me pregnant or, I'm gonna get judged or whatever. And so that was a part of that. And then this whole space of being in diet culture, especially in like the 80s and 90s, where like diet culture's whole thing is like you can't trust yourself. Here's this thing outside of you, this product, this diet, this rule that you need to like follow because you can't really trust your own desires and appetites around food.
Mm.
So from both sides, both for sex and food, you see this like shutting down and disembodiment. Like I can't listen to my body because if I were to listen to my body, that would be really like not okay for any number of reasons. And so um moving forward in my adolescence and emerging adulthood, it resulted in an eating disorder and like the peak manifestation. And something that was really clear to me as like things just progressively ramped up with the eating disorder is just how cut off I was from like any wanting. So a lot of my eating disorder was restriction and deprivation. And the same was true with sex. So like restriction, deprivation, that's you need to shut it down, cut it off kind of thing.
Mm.
And through eventually getting treatment and like really rupturing those cultural narratives that I got in my upbringing, there was this new reclamation and permission giving of like, oh, I got to drop into my body for the first time. And like, whoa, there's a lot of information and wisdom here that's worth paying attention to and honoring, like casting out the shame and the guilt and like really being and validating what I want. And so all of that contributed to me pursuing to be a therapist, like specializing in eating disorders, disordered eating, body image, sex and pleasure. So that's how I became a sex therapist. It was like trying to solve a problem of like, oh, I don't know anything about my anatomy or how this functions. And so it's a much safer place for me to be in my head still. And so that's how I kind of work through things. I get the head knowledge and then I drop in and like live it. And so yeah, that's what's brought me to this work. And now what I love to do is specifically work with women to drop into their body, find embodiment, and listen to their longings, to their appetites, because they are so important. We don't selectively cut off, right? Like if we're cut off, we're like all the way cut off from our aliveness and our joy and our agency, our empowerment. Like it just all goes together.
Yeah, that is huge. That is so huge. I love that you mentioned that you can't like selectively, not like selective listening where you're just only taking in whatever, but if you are listening to your body, these messages kind of come through full force.
Yeah, you have to listen.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, they make you listen. I feel like, at least within my practice, with pelvic health, it's like the body will try to speak to you in whatever way, shape, or form until you are like submitting to
Yeah.
responding to it. And it's
Yeah.
so unfortunate that I feel like a lot of women let it, there, or maybe they're not even receiving them as messages yet. And it's just like, an inconvenience or just, a consequence of something that they did. Just for an
Yeah.
example, like a UTI, like, oh, shoot, like I didn't take off my sweaty yoga gear or whatever. But
Mhm.
sometimes those messages come through so fully and then consistently, and then they're chronic. And then it's like, okay, hang on. I gotta
Uh-huh.
pause because life has just gotten way too out of hand for me to be
Yes.
able to hold on to this. And
Mhm.
then you have to like pay attention. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Yeah, there's this phrase, like sometimes the body needs to scream in order for you to heal. And I think that's where we see all these like symptoms and like pain and shame and maybe eating disorder, like all these bodily manifestations of the body trying to get our attention. And when that happens, I mean, we need to slow down. It's a really good indicator of like, let's be with what's here and tend to it.
yeah, yeah, that's so huge. And it's not easy, right? To like sit with all of
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So, but yeah, slowing down is like, I think the probably my biggest learning.
Mhm.
And like being in the noticing of these small moments, especially I think when it comes to like just pleasure and the appetite and desire. I have a lot of friends and like even personally, I feel like I've experienced uh for lack of a better term right now, like a lower libido. And I
Mhm.
just know like it's not a drive. Like it's not to me. It doesn't actually feel like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not broken.
Mhm.
So, what is the like environment? What's the context? What is the
Yes.
actual scenario of what's happening that makes me feel like I don't want it?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, if you don't wanna have sex, that means the sex you're having is probably not for you.
Mm,
Right? Like, it's not centering your pleasure, it's not centering your longing, and, I mean, so much compassion if you don't know those things because you haven't likely been in an environment or a context that has nurtured you being able to own that and explore that and, pursue that freely, right? Without this, like, overlay of guilt or shame.
or fear, like what you had said before, like fear of
Yeah.
pregnancy, fear when you,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
fear of disease or, yeah,
Mhm. Mhm.
dysfunction.
Mhm.
That's so, so true. And I feel like that was actually, I don't know, a gift, I guess, from the
Yeah.
relationship that I'm in right now. It feels like, oh, yeah, I get to explore this with someone who
Mhm.
can finally center me.
Yes.
But
Yes. Oh, I'm so happy for you.
I
Yeah.
I think about or I just thought of this one guy who maybe before I was even ready for it though, like or
Mm.
just almost like taking the spotlight back on me. It was in college
Mm.
and it was after I was quote unquote outed as a sexual person.
Mm.
Like my parents
Right.
found out that I was on birth control, meaning, okay, like she's sexually active while I was, away from home. And
Mhm.
I broke out in hives.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
looking back, obviously that was shame.
Mhm.
But I remember having a partner at one point in that time frame where he was like, I'm gonna help you get there because I hadn't had an
Mhm.
orgasm before. He's like, I'm
Mhm.
just gonna help
Mhm.
you, like we're gonna center
Mhm.
you. But it felt like so much pressure.
Yeah. Oh, that's yes, that can be really uncomfortable, right? Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah.
he's gonna make me? What?
Yeah. Yeah. It's still so outcome oriented, which is kind of like, ooh, that can be
Yeah.
a tricky spot versus like the process of like finding pleasure along the way.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay, so you are also a sex coach, right?
Sex therapist. Yeah. Mhm.
Therapist. Well,
Mhm.
yes, therapist, of course.
Mhm.
Okay, so are you working with couples?
Yeah, I work with couples and individuals with like sex therapy specific needs, and it's
Okay.
yeah, really fun work. Mhm.
I can only imagine the homework. Can you give some examples of some fun homework for people if they are, say
Yeah.
there's someone like me maybe who I feel like I have a connection to my sexual creativity and
Mhm.
my aliveness in that way, but it
Mhm.
is a matter of, I guess it's like finding the context again, like the capacity
Mhm.
to switch from work
Yeah.
mode to then
Yeah.
sexual mode. And maybe there's a certain layer of like where I'm at in my cycle that makes me feel
Mhm.
like if I'm say trying to avoid pregnancy, um,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
like all the fears that are wrapped into that,
Mhm.
um, for now, I guess. But
Mhm.
we want to be parents one day, so it's just a for now thing. But
Right.
if yeah, maybe okay, so like fake partner, hypothetical partner who is goal oriented,
Mhm.
how what would you say to those partners and
Yeah.
what are some homework pieces maybe that they can play with?
Yeah. So a big part of sex therapy overall is giving appropriate sex education because most of us have not gotten good sex education. I mean, even if you grew up in a really sex positive household, that doesn't mean that the sex education you got was really great. So I just like to preface with that because I think there's a lot of myths and unlearning that needs to happen as a part of the homework. So, um, one big learning piece that I usually preface is we want to take away goal oriented sex or outcome oriented sex outside of pleasure is the measure, right? This
Mm-hmm.
is a phrase from Ellie Nagoski. So we're going to let go of an orgasm. We're going to let go of having like a peak sexual experience or peak connection, peak intimacy. Like we're going to kind of set all of those things aside and instead lead with a lot of curiosity and creativity. I love that you use that word, where we're able to envision and script sex differently so that we're really opening up the repertoire of what this could be. And um, I think helping people deconstruct too, like, what is the meaning of an orgasm to you? Like, for a partner who is like really goal oriented, my question might be, and how does your partner not having an orgasm reflect on you? Like, what does that make? What are the stories that you are now saying? Like, I'm not a good lover, or like I'm incapable, or I'm like messing this up. It's like, well, no, like let's slow that down too, right? Because now we're just having all this performance anxiety both ways, which I can tell you anxiety of any kind is really a tamp down on any like arousal for one, but definitely pleasure. Like it's really hard to experience pleasure when you're anxious or like an observer, right? Versus being in your body and experiencing it. So one of the most basic homework assignments that I might do for folks is like a touch exercise, but a non-demand touch exercise. So um, some people refer to this as sensate focus, where you're having folks explore with touch and not even sexual touch, like meaning like we're not touching like genitals or we're not touching breasts or any other like exciting places. It's just like general touch. And can we just be with that sensation and play around with like temperature and pressure and things like that? And I think doing that helps open up a different way of communicating around what feels good because there's less stake and like, I'm going to have an orgasm or not, or is that the spot? Right? It's more around like, ooh, now I'm practicing being assertive and asserting for my needs and what actually feels good or what doesn't. And coaching and like figuring it out together is such a beautiful equalizer versus like, I need you to come now. Right?
That made me just run dry. Like,
Yeah.
I need you
Right.
to come now. Oh my
Right.
gosh. Can you
Uh-huh.
imagine if someone said that to you? Please don't ever say that to anyone.
Yeah. Never say that. And yeah, try not to imply it either.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Right.
I could
Mhm.
totally see that going both ways. And I feel like there are
Yeah.
moments probably and you're thinking that, like, can you just finish now?
Can you just get it over with? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Mhm.
my gosh. We just watched Sex in the City again from the start.
Oh, classic.
Yeah. And that one scene where Miranda and Steve are having sex and she's like, can you just get it over with? And he completely shuts down.
He
Oh
deflates.
my
Yeah, totally.
God.
Uh-huh.
I felt so bad for him in that
I
moment. But I
know.
also, okay, that's like a total other scenario, right? You have the overworked, maybe she's even early postpartum mom
Hmm.
and she's running and burning the both ends of the candlestick, whatever that phrase
Hmm.
is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then you have this partner who just really wants to, I think in the end, genuinely connect with you.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
love the homework of even like redefining what that kind of intimacy can look like while you even take the, I like how you said the like peak experience, right? Because the
Hmm.
peak experience, I think for most people, they immediately go to is P and the V.
Hmm.
Just kind
Hmm.
of any kind of like penetrative experience,
Totally. Hmm.
right? But it's like, what
Which
if,
isn't super centering if like we're talking about a heterosexual couple, like isn't super centering on, a woman's pleasure or experience. Because a lot of people can't experience, like don't have enough sensation from penetrative sex to really get a lot of pleasure from that. Not that it can't be pleasurable, but
right, right. But that might not be where they experience their climax or orgasm.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a good point.
Mhm.
Um, but what, so I guess this is something I talk to with my clients for sure, just to have them think about that in those early stages of postpartum. I think that sensate, or what did you call it? You called it
Yeah,
like touch
sensate
focus.
focus.
Mhm. But yeah, you called it a touch experience, right? Or
Non-demand touch experience. Yeah.
I like the non-demand because in a way it's so um what's the word? It is like once you take it off the table, it's like you just want that anyways.
Hmm.
Why can't I think of that word or that phrase?
Like forbidden fruit, is that what you mean? Or
Yeah, kind of. Exactly. It's like you just want what you can't have
yeah.
in that moment. So it's like you end up getting that.
Uh-huh.
But do you
Yeah.
notice that a lot of people end up like when they do that, are they still bypassing that like slowing down experience? And then,
Mhm.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it certainly depends. I think some folks really appreciate the opportunity to slow down and have permission to slow down. And I think for some, it is really hard to delink and unhook like outcome-oriented sex. And so, like, even though they like try to get extra credit or something with the homework of like, well, this wasn't a non-demand touch exercise, but actually this ended up happening anyway,
Yeah.
which is fine, but also like that is never the goal or the expectation. And I think what happens is exactly that. The more that we create mystery and spaciousness,
Mm,
there's room for like the fire to grow. And anticipation is like the biggest turn on, right? Like if you think about what a lot of women love as far as like the fantasy that they read, it's like a lot of sexual tension, a lot of buildup, and there's not a lot of like, will it happen? Will it not? I don't know. I feel so desired or desirable. Um, so it really kind of fuels that a little bit and also really helps them get more confident in articulating what they want. And like really being able to own that with some confidence. Mhm.
Oh my gosh. I love that. And I feel like I recognize myself in that a lot because
Mhm.
anticipation for me is
That's it, right?
if you can draw it out and keep that fire, just
Mhm.
stoke that.
Mhm.
I think Esther Perel, right? She said that foreplay begins after the last orgasm or
Yeah,
those
yeah. I
lines.
love her work. Yeah.
I know. It's so true, at least for me,
Mhm.
you
Yeah,
know?
same. Same.
Yeah.
Like everything is foreplay. It's not just like, whatever you dedicate before like getting into a more intimate experience. It's like all of it. Mhm.
Yeah, totally. Okay, wait, this is gonna I want some like maybe clarity around this or at least maybe some like discussion because now I'm almost envisioning like you could keep drawing it out as anticipation, right? Like for maybe something like penetrative sex. if we're talking heterosexual couples. Um, like what are your thoughts on people who say come from like purity culture? Maybe they've, reckoned with that a little bit and have
Mhm.
experienced their sexuality a bit and experimented with that, and then um say they meet someone that they want to be with, and maybe they do have sex, maybe they don't, but they wait until they're married as like
Mhm.
a form of anticipation. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm gonna maybe put in a little feedback myself, but I feel like there's a difference, right, between the anticipation part and the restrictive part.
Totally. Yeah. I think one is suppression, right? It's like really trying and repression, trying to like get that away, right? It's like a real denial. Um, and we know denial, interestingly enough, like creates so much shame around whatever we're denying because there's like some should statement implicit in that. Um, Whereas like the anticipation is a lot more open and fluid, and it's like there's so much more permission that allows it to be exciting, right? We're not repressing anything really. It's just like tending to it, nurturing it. That feels a little bit different.
Absolutely. It feels way more playful. Like you can talk
Yeah.
about it and
Yeah.
just plan for what you might
Mhm.
want. And that is part of the
Mhm.
foreplay and
Mhm.
anticipation.
Mhm.
Okay. I do like that a
Yeah, yeah.
lot.
Mhm. Yeah, I like the metaphor you used of like a fire, like you're like stoking it like gently and trying to like fuel over time versus like, a really quick fire that immediately goes out because you didn't put like the right kindling or like everything like that into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You just want it to grow, 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 add a log here and there, whatever that
Yeah,
looks like.
exactly. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, I feel like can we loop back to maybe how that desire, not maybe from like a pleasure standpoint, but even from like the food pleasure standpoint,
Hmm.
like there has to be a tie in an analogy with that even.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really helpful to think about desires and appetites. And I'm going to talk specifically about women,
Yeah.
and the role that an oppressive patriarchy has around what women should or shouldn't want. And it's kind of like an impossible setup for many women, right?
Yeah.
So patriarchy gives us these like body ideals from diet culture. And so that leads a lot of women to be really depriving or restrictive around food or have a lot of like rules around food, should statements, and things like that. But also that's mimicked with sex. I mean, there's such a fear in our patriarchy of being slut shamed or like you shouldn't like sex too much because that means, you're a whore or
It's
like
like
all of the
the overindulgence of
yes,
sexuality or of food, and now you're obese,
yes,
and it's
yes.
a fear for sure.
Yeah, like again, it kind of anchors back into like patriarchy's general narrative is that women cannot trust their body, they cannot listen to their body because again, if they were to listen to it, it might be too much. And if women are consumed with like trying to like contort themselves and to take up as little space as possible, so we could think about that like with body size, but also within sex, right? Like smallness is like an ideal in patriarchy. And so there's lots of manifestations to that. But, I do sex therapy and I work with eating disorders because there's such a big overlap. This isn't like selective cutting off of desire. Like if someone is really in a deprivation mindset or a restrictive mindset with food, it applies everywhere else. Like it applies to like feelings, like I can't be too much, or in sex, like I need to like center my take care of everyone else before myself, whether that's in sex or in my family or caregiving or whatever it might be. And to push back against all of this, I think it's helpful to zoom out and look at like the system that's invested in you being disembodied and disconnected from your appetites and your desires. And I think a fear that a lot of women have is, well, if I give myself permission to have my desire to live into my appetites and give myself to those, like I'm going to be out of control,
Mm.
right? So as an example, some folks that I work with will say, well, I can't keep ice cream in the house because if I have ice cream in the house, like I'm just going to eat it. Or like I can't watch pornography because like that's not okay, like that's dirty or whatever. And I'm not here to say like any of those is good, bad, or whatever, but I do know that anytime you're depriving yourself or restricting yourself from something that you want, you're going to have shame and guilt benchmarks. And it's also going to enhance like a real smallness that you're going to try and contort yourself into that is not sustainable for your livelihood and your joy and your pleasure for that matter. You're really unable to um, feel into that as fully in your aliveness. And so, what I advocate for instead is like give yourself like a permission slip for all foods and like give yourself permission slip for like all sexual behavior, like within a consensual relationship. And what you're going to find is that your body's wisdom will more clearly be able to come forward because when you're embodied and you're listening to your body, like your body is not going to want you to eat ice cream all the time. Like at some point, you will stop. And actually, there'll be more balance and more freedom that comes with food. And I think the same is true for sex. And again, like zooming out and looking at all of the reasons why you may be in a restrictive or depriving mindset makes so much sense. So I want to give like folks who are listening so much compassion if that's where you're finding yourself now, because that's really validated in our culture. And when we think about like body liberation work, I'm thinking about that in a holistic sense, not just with like food, but it's also with sex and like all of our appetites that come along with that.
Hmm. That was such a good way to bridge all of that together. And the phrase that I don't know why I sunk into this, but I sunk into the guilt and shame benchmark. I'm curious
Yeah.
what you mean by that. And I wanted just to share a visual that I got, like kind of with the same thing of like once you take something off the table, it's like, okay, so you take it off the table, you crave that, you actually want that, right?
Yeah.
But then
Hmm.
when you have all the choices there and available, you might not make that same choice like for ice cream over and over and over again. Like you get
Yeah.
sick of having that choice. You're gonna go
Yes.
pick something else, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
there was a thought of like at some level there might need to be a certain like self responsibility that people get to claim, right?
Yes. Yes.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't trust yourself. That's kind of the piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have something quote unquote bad that you
Mm-hmm.
actually do want in your presence, in your possession.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's like a responsibility. Can you wield that power well?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really believe that pleasure is our birthright and it's been co-opted to be associated with like too much or not enough. And like the not enough comes in with like, often when people deprive themselves, let's keep going with ice cream. Like it just sets them up to like binge on ice cream, right? Um, and so like shame and guilt are the measuring sticks, I think, of the too much or not enough. Like those are always at play. And so reclaiming pleasure is an act of resistance against like this culture that wants you to feel shame and guilt around these things. And that has made indulgence in general a dirty word. Um,
Mm,
and when you reclaim it, there's, like you said, there's like this awakening and a reclamation of trust in your body, embodiment, which comes along with like all these emotions and sensations and joy. And yes, like grief and pain, like we are awake to all of it. And that's the aliveness that's here. And it's a part of our humanness. And I really believe pleasure is a core intelligence of humanity. Like if you think about any other, like most other animals don't experience pleasure in the way that we do, as far as
right.
I'm aware. Like some mammals, yeah, but it's really a core distinguisher and intelligence that we hold. And so like reclaim it, own it. Um, like reject the shame and guilt narratives that are keeping you really small in
Ex-
this way.
Exactly. 100%. I was almost thinking or envisioning, you know, pain and pleasure being kind of on this cyclical, I don't know,
Mm.
connective sphere, right? Like they are kind
Yeah.
of related and sitting
Yeah.
right next to each other. But as you were naming all the ways that we can actually feel alive, like
Mhm.
feeling joy, feeling pain, feeling grief,
Mhm.
I just I'm thinking about people that are so uncomfortable with their own emotions, like
Yeah.
even being able to feel their sadness
Yeah.
and then other people being really um awkward
Mhm.
or like unable to hold someone else's emotions.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
And it's like, okay, if you can't, I don't know, I feel like there are obviously probably easier emotions to be present for.
Mhm.
But I feel like if you're trying to be, because sex is truly vulnerable, right? Even
Mhm.
eating in front of someone. People talk about this
Yeah.
all the time in first dates and stuff. It's so
Yeah.
vulnerable to pick what you want to eat because
Mhm.
you might get shit in your teeth or you might have
Mhm.
bad breath. Like
Totally.
you're just like
Mhm.
constantly thinking about ways to like play it safe, play it small. But then
Mhm.
how do you expect yourself to feel all this other stuff,
Yeah.
pleasure, joy, full on bliss,
Mhm.
orgasmic arousal, like everything
Mhm.
on this end of
Mhm.
the spectrum without potentially feeling other things.
Yeah, I think that's the deal that we have as humans, right? Like, um, it's true. I mean, I think it can be really uncomfortable to feel those feelings, and so that's where, like, it totally makes sense to me. I mean, that was what I lived, like, being disembodied, that was a survival strategy for a long time. Like, I had to assimilate into these different cultures that I grew up in, and that's how I found acceptance. And then when I individuated, it was like, oof, yeah, like all of a sudden I'm like feeling all of this shit that like I didn't want to feel or didn't really feel in its full extent, especially the grief, like the grief of what I didn't get. And what I can also say is that on the other side of pain is just so much beautiful magnetic joy,
Mm.
and it like sharpens it. It like brings it into clear focus, the joy and the gratitude and the aliveness when you move through all of the shit of it. Right. So it's a hard bargain, but it's like it's a worthwhile one. Mhm.
Absolutely. I'm reading Women Who Run with the Wolves right now.
Yeah, so good.
Oh my
Mhm.
God. It's like, I don't even know how to explain it to people sometimes because it's so rich
Yeah.
with just this nuance to everything.
Hmm.
But I feel like one concept that she keeps pulling in for that wild woman archetype is like the understanding and the acceptance of the life death life cycle. And
Hmm.
it kind of just feels similar to this in
Yeah.
a way, like
It's
to be,
fitting.
yeah, yeah, it's totally fitting just to be in understanding and acceptance that you can't have the joy and the gratitude and feel that magnetism without sometimes having to feel the sadness and grief and pain.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm. Yeah.
sometimes after the deepest ruptures is that deepest repair.
And connection, it like deepens it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, well, that's so powerful to be reminded of. Mm,
Yeah.
just gonna let that one sink in for a second.
I
Yeah.
know. It's like, oh, make room for all of it, you know?
Yeah. I feel like that's the name of the game for sure as humans, right? Just
Mhm.
doing what we can to expose ourselves and feel like our capacity is growing with each new
Mhm.
experience. And
Mhm.
I feel like, yes, learning to trust yourself and learning to trust that, like, maybe a higher knowing, if you believe in that, that
Mhm.
is, it's not going to lead you astray.
Yes, totally. I wholeheartedly believe that. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's so cool.
Yeah. Hmm.
Ah, well, Cassie, I don't want to eat up too much of your time. Sorry for the pun.
That's amazing. Well done.
Oh, thank you. That just came to me. But where can people find you? Where can people work with you? Or how are you primarily wanting to work with people?
Yeah.
Any recent offerings that you've got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So you can find me on Instagram. The name of my practice is Inner Atlas Therapy. So Inner Atlas meaning you have everything within you. And that's also where you'll be able to connect and find my new podcast, which is called Taking Up Space, where we focus on themes of healing, embodiment, and body liberation. And I have some free resources on my website, inneratlastherapy.com. Like I have a Taking Up Space workbook that I just released and coinciding with the podcast. And I do some work in EMDR and IFS therapy as well. And I have some free resources there as well. So please check it out.
Oh man, I love that. I love all those offerings. I'm so excited for you and your podcast and for everyone to have been exposed to you and your work. But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This has been such a treat.
Yeah, same here. Another pun. Another pleasurable treat.
Yeah, treats. Mhm.
Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next time.